Thank you all for coming out to the Wheeler Centre on this not as chilly as it was yesterday Melbourne evening. It's great to congregate in a space like this and share interesting ideas with interesting guests, and we certainly have that on offer for you tonight. Rather than being consigned to history, the masculine ideals and language of yesteryear have been making a comeback. Notions of physical and moral weakness have been associated with almost forgotten schoolyard terminology such as wimp or goodies and baddies. Masculinity is once again being equated with strength, resolve and decisiveness. So why are these old-fashioned terms seeping back into the lexicon when the notion of what it means to be a man has changed so dramatically in the past few decades? What are the current ideals of masculinity that young men are aspiring to in the media and public life? And more to the point, is this a step forwards or backwards? My name's Clementine Ford and I'll be your host for the evening. I'm a feminist writer, self-described boner killer and a Greens voter. So I'm the perfect choice to moderate a discussion about masculinity for a disgustingly left-wing intellectual latte sipping institution like the Wheeler Centre. To paraphrase the great and noble gender warrior and academic whom we otherwise know as Tony Abbott, Prime Minister for Women, there are at least 3 men in my family, so I am perfectly qualified to lead them. We are joined tonight by 3 very interesting, very diverse guests. From your left to right, we have Benjamin Law, Jennifer Granger, and Ben Birchall. Benjamin Law is a Sydney-based journalist, screenwriter and columnist for Good Weekend. He's the author of 2 books, the black comedy memoir The Family Law and the travel adventure Geisha, Adventures in the Queer East, and also the co-author of the comedy book Shit Asian Mothers Say with his sister Michelle Law. Please join me in welcoming Benjamin Law.
Now, as you might be able to tell, I am not necessarily the most manly of men. I've got a bit of a cold at the moment. This is my tissue box, and it's a man tissue box, I feel. It's probably only been in the last few years that I've started not being medically underweight. I couldn't drive a manual car till well into my late 20s. It took me a long time to learn that primary lesson of how does Benjamin make manual car go forward. And I still dislike any physical activity that involves balls. Most physical activities. My first book, The Family Law, was a black comedy memoir about growing up gay and Asian in coastal Queensland in the 1990s as my parents' marriage dissolved around me, so the typical Australian story, really. And it featured a chapter where I discuss my anxieties around the very topic tonight, which is masculinity, and I talked about it at length. And most of those anxieties, I realised growing up, were mainly to do with my physicality. And I wrote at the time, this was a few years ago, but I wrote about my teenage years. There are some men in the world who are unambiguously male, unquestionably, identifiably, inherently male. It's not uncommon for teenagers I encounter on public transport to be twice my size, twice as physically developed, even though I'm twice their age. And these creatures who apparently share the same XY chromosome pairing as me are tall and broad-shouldered. They have feet like concrete slabs. They already have 5 o'clock shadows, legs like carved tree trunks, and they sport hair on their chests and arses. One assumes their genitals swing between their legs like anvils and their shit stinks like the wet earth. They are, undeniably, already men. When it came to me, it was as though my mother's uterus had several moments of hesitation in deciding what it'd produce. After coming up with Andrew, my veritable giant of a brother, my mother's womb was exhausted and indecisive throughout 1982. Well, the baby should definitely have a penis, the uterus decided. Yep, slap one of those on. Should we put hair on its forearms? No, maybe hold back on the forearm hair, I don't know. What about leg hair? Leg hair, yes! Leg hair, no, stop, now. I know, put it back. And the result of this indecisiveness was me, this Asian hybrid man-child thing. Someone with a 27-inch waistline, hands like a well-manicured woman. It's true. Unsightly and improvised leg hair growth, and inexplicably sometimes when I have a cold, a baritone voice that can sort of sound like a gay James Earl Jones. Despite my skinny frame and Asiatic eyes, I also have the sensual, full-blooded lips of a black female R&B singer. And for the majority of my life, I've worked against the outcome of this genetic lottery. I've tried bashing shit with karate, listening to different music, gaining weight, building muscle, slouching, at one stage pretending to like girls, but nothing really worked. And now, at the age of 25, and I'm now 31, I've given up trying. Yes, I'll swear like a stevedore, but I refuse to heckle. I'll belch in public, but I'll refrain from farting. I'll grow hair on my abdomen, but not on my calves, and I'll eat your meat pie, but not your vagina. I'm a compromised failure of a man. Now, as someone, as I noted before, who's gay and Asian, this sort of turducken of minority groups, my sense of masculinity is also governed by my sexuality and my race. And when I was a teenager in coastal Queensland, I lived in mortal fear that someone would discover that I was gay. I graduated in 1999 at 17, which is the age you graduate in Queensland. And at that age, I still hadn't met another openly gay person. Internet was still dial-up. This was a completely different era. Luckily, though, in the schoolyard, this is actually where my ethnicity weirdly helped. As I write in the same chapter, when puberty hit, all the teenage schoolyard boys reeking of armpits, penis, and locker room links were on the hunt for anyone remotely queer to exercise their knuckles on. God knows how, but I passed the test. I learned which girls were supposed to be attractive, I perfected my man walk, and I had that rich baritone voice to hide behind. And people chose to look beyond my involvement in the all-female clarinet ensemble and my art class assignment submissions of semi-naked, muscled, Christ-like figures. And being Asian helped, because people never suspect you could be a racial minority and gay. Of course you're not gay, you're foreign. Now, on the other hand, this is a really interesting discussion point, the politics of passing, because not all of us pass. On the other hand, my current boyfriend was mercilessly bullied throughout school for being a faggot and a poofter. And as he likes to say nowadays, if you want to find the people with the most finely tuned gaydar of all, go straight to the straight teenage jocks in any Australian high school. They can sniff out gay boys from a mile away, even if they don't know they're gay themselves. And look, I'm going to wrap it up soon, but what I'd really like to talk about today, to some extent hopefully, is the way in which masculinity is policed as well by other people. I've always been fascinated that of all the different aspects of human behaviour, that how we present as masculine or feminine is always someone else's business. Why signs of softness and emotional vulnerability and flamboyance are regarded by both men and women as being weak, inferior, or often revolting. It actually reminds me of the time of the year my maternal grandmother died, and it was this very solemn occasion, and I joined my extended family to fly to Hong Kong for the funeral. And because it was a really sad time in our lives, I greeted my uncle with a hug, and he looked at me very sternly, and he simply said, "Men shake hands, Ben, they don't hug." And we feel this urge to police and enforce gendered codes of behaviour. As I've gotten older, though, I have realised that this isn't just a thing that, straight men do to each other or straight men just do to gay men. I really became aware of this, particularly yesterday when Ian Thorpe came out, that gay men are really, really quite vicious in policing each other's masculinity as well. When Ian Thorpe confirmed he was gay on national TV last night, Some of the most immediate reactions from gay people in my social media feeds included, tell us something we don't know, in news that will surprise exactly nobody, well, duh. All of these assumptions, these mean-spirited, and it struck me as a little bit smug as well, that your finely tuned gaydar was so fine that it picked up someone who didn't know that they were gay themselves. And look, everyone crowed, we were right, and it made this personal coming out all about them. I'd like to talk about this further on, but just as a closing note, I do mention race, masculinity, gender, and also ethnicity. And I do also feel that mainstream gay culture in its own way, I'm just going to drop a bomb before I sit back down, is incredibly conservative, infuriatingly palatable, and extremely white. To give you an example, if you go through the back catalogue covers of DNA, Australia's only national newsstand magazine for gay men, you will find over its course of 179 issues, only one non-white cover model. Anyway, I'll leave you with that, and I'll leave you with a tweet that I came across recently. Maybe this can be a discussion point. Equality, scream the white gays with legalised gay across their shirts, and no blacks, no Asians, and no femmes across their Grindr profile. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Benjamin Law. And if you would be interested in seeing some images of his hair-free body, I believe that he has posed nude recently in an edition of the Good Weekend magazine.
It's what will kill Fairfax eventually.
Now, I must apologise to you. I've just had the terribly embarrassing thing happen as a moderator of going to click on my notes to make some notes about what Ben was saying, and the document has completely disappeared, which means that I don't have to hand Jennifer Granger's biography to read for you. I apologise sincerely. I will fix this while she is delivering a presentation to you now, and hopefully you'll forgive me if I give you a postscript biography for her. Please welcome Jennifer Granger.
Ben, you really don't need to worry about all this external physicality. My work is all about internal genders. That's what really matters. Hi, I'm Jennifer Granger, and this year I had a book released, and it was called Feminine Lost: Why Most Women Are Male. But the title could just have easily have been Masculine Lost: Why Most Men Are Feminine, if I had chosen to put my focus on men. The fundamental premise of the book is that men and women are both masculine and feminine, regardless of whether we are man or woman physically. This means that as a man you are not fully masculine, and as a woman you're not fully feminine. I know this is a bit difficult to get your head around if this is the first time that you're hearing the premise, but it is the combination and the mix of our internal masculine and feminine makeup that determines how we express ourselves into the world. When you start to understand this principle, you will see how men and women are inextricably linked. Men and women are on a seesaw. What happens to women will have a corresponding effect on men and vice versa. It is the interplay of our internal genders that ultimately determines our levels of balance. There are quite a few kilometres on this old vehicle, and I've had the privilege to see how we have evolved as men and women over the past 50 years. I've been around for the entire journey since the feminist movement, and I have to say it's been quite a ride. The feminist movement was probably one of the most invigorating and life-altering movements ever experienced in our recorded history. It came at a time when both women and men were not prepared to play the stereotypical roles that had been forced upon them for centuries, and especially in the post-war era. The movement encouraged women to go out and exercise their masculine side. I don't think they realized that that's what they were doing at the time, but it was go to work, be who you want to be, take control of your own body, decide what you want to do with your life, and most important of all, women got to realize that they no longer had to pay second fiddle to any man, even if that man was their husband. As women in the 60s and 70s, we embraced the movement wholeheartedly. I remember so clearly enjoying the idea of the possibilities that now stretched before me. I was already doing things at 18, 19 and 20 that my mother would never have dreamed were possible for herself or even her daughters in an entire lifetime. It was so exhilarating. But while women were overtly enjoying their new possibilities, something curious was happening for men. Without realizing it, the feminist movement had not only released women to their masculine side, but they had unwittingly released men to their feminine. The seesaw effect had begun. And as women have travelled deeper and deeper into their masculine, men, whether consciously or not, have shifted into their feminine to such a significant extent that some men have lost connection and access to their masculine side altogether. But the femininity within men is not equal. There are those men who have embraced their femininity so naturally that I have named them in the book as the highly feminine man. These men are not necessarily gay, but they have a strong feminine orientation. What that means is that he doesn't enjoy confrontation necessarily. He might have difficulty making decisions. He tends to go along to get along. And he might be a little delicate, and he is definitely sensitive. He enjoys the feminine side of life. He is receptive, but not necessarily happy to initiate things. Because this man's masculine side is not functioning at a full capacity, he tends to partner with someone who will carry that part of him that is a little less robust, his masculine side. We see with gay men that one of the men in the partnership will always be more butch than the other. It is simply their inner genders playing out. We tend to attract the opposite of our dominant internal gender pole. With the heterosexual feminine man, the process is exactly the same. He'll carry the same strengths and weaknesses as the gay man, but his partner of choice will be a woman of high masculine orientation. I define the man that I find most balanced at this time as the sensitive man. He is our most balanced man because he operates both out of his masculine and feminine quite effortlessly. He's happy operating out of his masculine side, making decisions, initiating all sorts of activities. He's protective and action-oriented. I find that he's also often confused. His sensitivity is such that he is afraid to be seen as doing the wrong thing. He does not want to be viewed as politically incorrect. He has strong opinions, and if those opinions are not in sync with the ideas of the women around him, he tends to be a little reticent. The macho man. He has all but disappeared from view, and I think most of us breathe a sigh of relief that he has. He is considered almost Neanderthal now, but I believe he has simply morphed into something a little more sinister. I call him the pseudo-masculine man. This man is still nursing the wounds of the unfairness that women are now regarded as equal. And I want to take this time to point out that it is my view that women have always been equal, no matter what men of ages past have believed. But this man is not happy with the loss of all the privileges he could have enjoyed for simply being born a man. He plays the game with women. He is extremely charming, but underneath the charm and the smooth talk, he resents women for their equality, and in severe cases, he reveals himself as a misogynist. You can see how slowly over the past 50 years, we have inverted our internal genders as women and men, and it is causing such confusion and frustration socially in our relationships at work, and our intimate relationships are absolutely in turmoil. The patriarchy is in its death throes, but what is emerging in its place? Are we destined to a future of masculine women and men descending further and further into their femininity? Are we destined to complete the full cycle of our internal gender reversal? Do we resign ourselves to the loss of our feminine as women and the loss of our masculine as men? Or Are we simply just evolving into a truly androgynous society with the war between the sexes finally at an end? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer Granger, and again, apologies for my little technology failure before. They say that computers will take over the world, but God, we'd be lost if that actually happened. Jennifer Granger is a transformational coach and the author of the book Feminine Lost: Why Most Women Are Male. Her book discusses the sorry state of relationships between men and women in the boardrooms and bedrooms around the world. Thank you very much, Jennifer Granger. Our last speaker tonight is Ben Birchall. Ben Birchall is a writer, broadcaster and creative all-rounder who has presented Triple R's Breakfasters, worked in advertising, social media and publishing, and is currently the social director at Clementine BBDO Melbourne. And he's taken on the role of creative director at Right Angle Studio, or will be taking on the role of creative angle in a couple of weeks. Thank you very much. Please welcome Ben Birchall.
Thanks very much. I haven't written a book, unlike the other people who have spoken very, very eloquently before me, so I've got pictures. And I think it's the inner ad man in me as well. This is called Masculinity 2.0. I don't know what that means, but maybe by the end of it we'll have figured it out. I've written in here, slideshow, which is good. It is kind of more a slideshow, and I'll go to the first slide to show you what I mean. This is me. This is me last year. I'm wearing a rabbit skin as a loincloth in this photograph. I'm in a freezing shed somewhere in between Ballarat and Daylesford, and I've just skinned that rabbit, and that's why I'm wearing it triumphantly as a loincloth. So the question is, how did I get here? And for the first, I guess to take you full circle to this journey of how I got into that freezing shed, I need to make a bit of a confession. Basically, I'm part of the problem. I know that Jennifer just mentioned that the masculine man is no longer with us. Well, he is with us, and he's on social media. And he likes the VB page. Now, as my role as social director at Clementine BBDO, our biggest client is the Carlton United Brewery. So part of my job is to oversee the social media pages for Vic Bitter and Carlton Draft, Carlton Dry, and there's a whole bunch of beers. And as you can see from this image, we have asked the men of the Vic Bitter page, there's about 60,000 people on the page, and I think it's about 80% men, whether they prefer the Ford Falcon XAGT or the Holden Monaro. And I just need to check my notes here. I think the Monaro won. But that's got a couple of hundred comments on it. It's been shared 124 times. It's been liked somewhere near 1,000 times. What we're kind of tapping into, and what I'm sort of, part of the problem of propagating, I'm happy to well, not happy to, but I'm prepared to admit, is a nostalgic view of masculinity. It's based basically on the 1970s Australian cricket team. It's Dennis Lilly, shirt unbuttoned to the navel, tag swinging, chest hair, mustache. And in a way, it's kind of a reaction to a kind of a post-David Beckham world, a world where men, I think, that they feel the need to be as physical and as sensitive as David Beckham and cook like Jamie Oliver. And there's a whole bunch of men out there, on Facebook that like the Vic Bitter page that just want to say, cheers, mate. I present this in a light-hearted way, but the idea of a mate is kind of paramount in this world, and this mateship usually involves sport, and it rarely involves kind of women in a lot of ways, and in a lot of ways it's kind of a fetishized version of the mateship that we've been kind of sold, in the Anzac tradition, for example. Another thing that is big in this world is sport and blokey activities like watching sport and fixing things. And, they're kind of held above all else. And I just want to make it perfectly clear, this stuff works. It sells beer. People relate to it. I think if I look at that one, there's over 1,000 people have liked that. A few hundred people have shared it again. If you can't see it back there, it's a remote control that just says the footy on it, and there's one button that's Channel 7. And it's branded as the official remote of the AFL. So what we've kind of tapped into, and we didn't invent it, but we're definitely sort of propagating it, is this really nostalgic view of manhood that is kind of arrested in some ways, pre the 1980s. Now I'm going to share something with you, and I've actually put a blank slide unintentionally before it, but I think I needed to sort of build up to it, because this is genuinely a confession. This isn't something that I tend to tell people that know that I am involved in Triple R and done all sort of good things for the community. This is either my zenith or my nadir of blokey advertising. Now this is an announcement that ran on the screen at I think Suncorp Stadium in Brisbane, where the Queensland Reds play, and it says. This was voiced over on top of it. It said, "This is a Carlton mid-announcement. Prepare to take a photo of this screen to send to your missus and then it counts down. And the next screen says, Dear patrons, we regret to inform you that kickoff has been delayed by 1 hour. And then another message said, now, send that photo on and enjoy an extra hour with your mates." So as I said, this is a confession. And this isn't any way of excusing the kind of shoddy version of manhood that it presents. It was really successful, won a whole bunch of international awards. So don't know what that says about advertising. So that was the confession part, and thank you for bearing with me. That was hard for me. Thank you for being my Oprah, Clem. So I'll move on to the correct. Oh, sorry, that's somebody actually texting it to their. It says, "Sorry, love, I might be a bit late tonight." So we're talking about that kind of fetishization of mate time, time away from women, in a really overly simplified way. So getting onto the sort of the correction part. So in 2013, I took a day off my advertising job after I finished the radio show that I used to do, and I went to work for a magazine called Smith Journal. And it had nothing to do with the guilt for my advertising sins, but it was kind of interesting, the oppositional view of manhood that Smith Journal kind of presents. It's a thinking person's men's magazine. It's really well written and well edited. It looks fantastic, and I guess it presents a more stylish and stylized version of masculinity. So this is sort of an ad. I think this is what you could win if you subscribe, and I think it kind of sums up a lot of what they're talking about. It's the outdoors, it's well-made things, it's do-it-yourself, it's fixing your own bike, it's brewing your own beer, it's growing your own beard, which I can't do. But there are kind of pitfalls to this view of masculinity as well. And if you look just sort of in the towards the middle there, you'll see a mug made of copper. That's meant to go camping, and if you buy that from the website that you could win this stuff from, it's called Kaufman Mercantile. The stuff is really beautiful. I think that camping mug costs about $250. So in some ways, it's kind of just as rigid as, and it's interesting Ben talking about these kind of rigid views of masculinity. In some ways, it's just as rigid. I mean, this is a story about vintage pocket knives. This is a story about people that make salami in their garages to old family recipes. It's really kind of positive stuff, but in a way, it's kind of presenting a view of masculinity that's as nostalgic, but it's kind of a confected nostalgia in a lot of ways. I've got one more slide here. This is a story about a rocking chair written by Benjamin Law. That I commissioned. It's a fantastic story. In some ways, it is as nostalgic, but yeah, again, probably not as honest in some ways as this 1970s view, because, you know, at least they're emulating what they thought their dad was like. My dad doesn't brew his own beer, and he doesn't actually does chop wood, which is good of him. So, you know, even though I kind of went there expecting, you know, a more positive version of manhood, in some ways, a lot of the same things held true. So that was kind of, you know, my version of a correction. Now let's get to the overcorrection part, and this is probably the reason behind it. And this is my son Walter. He's he's dressed like a showgirl there, which is nice. And I put Walter up there partly because I wasn't sure how good this talk was going to be, and at least a cute toddler will get me over the line. But fatherhood is kind of an interesting thing because it allows you to play a masculine role. And if you're somebody who is probably, you know, as confused as Jennifer was talking about, you know, I've got kind of both sides happening all the time. Fatherhood lets you kind of play that role. It allows you to sort of say, well, I'm working these stupidly long hours because I'm providing for this child, and I need to, you know, figure out my life a little bit better. It makes you reflect. It makes you kind of think about what your masculinity is, and makes you kind of ask that question: how do you raise a good son? And that's something that I kind of asked myself. And you know, that's where I found myself with this guy. His name's Rowan Anderson. He writes blogs and books under the name A Whole Lot of Love, and I kind of met him through Smith Journal. I have a fear of dead things, which I don't think is particularly masculine. I had a possum die of heat exhaustion underneath my bike one day, and in order to get to work, I needed to move the bike, so I got my wife to move the dead possum. Rowan does these workshops where you go away for the weekend up to Ballarat, and you know, do certain things, bake bread, or you forage for mushrooms. So here's some mushrooms I foraged. They're pine mushrooms, saffron caps. That's him cutting a chicken's heart up. We just slaughtered that chicken. That's the leg of the chicken we slaughtered. I actually couldn't physically do it. That's the dish I made of the chicken that I watched slaughtered. That I cooked for my family because I thought that was kind of a good thing to do. And this is me having just skinned a rabbit. So I confronted this, I guess, you know, what I saw to be a kind of failing in my masculinity. I didn't know how I would go handling a dead rabbit. It was sort of laid out on the slab in front of me, and I looked at it and I thought about it and I confronted it and I skinned it, and then I held it up like a loincloth because I'm a ham. But I guess, you know, at the end of it, I didn't really kind of learn a hell of a lot. I didn't really bring much of it home. I mean, I went foraging for mushrooms once more. So I kind of, again, this was just another type of kind of, you know, just presenting another form of masculinity that it didn't feel right for me to kind of live up to. And, you know, this is sort of a little anecdote my sister told me once, and she's a nurse, she's an oncology nurse in Geelong. And she was talking to a psychologist one day who did a few days of work with her, and this, you know, people at the end of their lives, really serious kind of stuff. And she said, what do you do the rest of the day and the rest of the week? And the psychologist said, I'm a psychologist in private practice in Northcote. And she said, that must be fun. And he said, no, it's horrible. I just deal with really depressed men who don't know how to juggle their like really full-on creative careers and then how to grow vegetables in their backyard. And they're all miserable. There is this kind of impossible archetype that we're kind of dealing with. So in order to cope with that, we're kind of reverting to this, you know. But we're not this anymore. We're not Dennis Lilly. You don't get away with that kind of behaviour other than on the Facebook page of a beer brand. It doesn't really add up. And, you know, if you look at the reaction to someone like Brian Taylor, the football commentator who used the word poofter on TV on Saturday night, you know, that it doesn't, you know, that behaviour isn't tolerated anymore. But, you know, we're also not this, you know, we're not we're not lumberjacks with huge beards that brew our own beer. You know, that's a sort of confected nostalgia. So I guess where it gets us is, well, where does it get us? While it sounds ridiculous to women, given that there is an 18% gender pay gap, there are actually issues for men. 1 in 8 men suffer from depression. Men are twice as likely to self-medicate that depression. 80% of suicides are men. I don't know how much of this has to do with a lack of definition about manhood. Filling that lack of definition with nostalgia and idealisation and fetishisation doesn't seem to be helping, So in a lot of ways, we're left to our own devices. And maybe that's not a bad thing. And maybe it's not that, manhood isn't clearly defined enough. Maybe it's too defined. If men could concentrate on being better men, if men could concentrate less on being better men, it might free them up to be better people. So, thank you.
Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen. Ben Birchall, that was wonderful. Not least of which was for that picture of Dennis Lilly reclined at the end there. We're going to have a little bit of a discussion now, and then we'll have some time for some questions at the end. I just wanted to start with, I was really interested, Ben, with the comparisons that you were making between those two tropes of masculinity, the really kind of Australiana 1970s version of it, as opposed to, as you said, the more confected version. I think it would be easy for us to identify negative aspects of that stereotypical masculinity, but I'm interested in what the panel think are the positive elements of masculinity. I think that particularly we can make a habit sometimes of stereotyping too much about what is good about being female and about femininity, but we're not so good at talking about the positive sides of what it means to be a man. So I thought we could start with that little discussion.
Well, I think it'd be handy to have someone around who could dispose of dead things and deal with the ickiness of life.
But is that a particularly masculine trait?
I don't know. I mean, it feels like a kind of maybe like a lack of, this maybe sounds strange, but like sort of a lack of introspection about things. Like, I think maybe it was because men were of a different time and all those kind of things. I think maybe women had a lot more of it too, a lack of introspection and just a kind of getting down and doing, what needs to be done. I wish I had more of that. Unless I wish I didn't stand over the body of the possum and think about the weight of it in the plastic bag as I carried it away. I wish I could have just, dealt with it and got my bike and ridden to work.
What do you think, Jennifer?
Well, I think that what you're describing is really just how we have evolved now. And it's exactly what I said. It's the femininity within men is very, very powerful right now. So you don't want to touch dead things, and you don't want to be doing things that are unpleasant, and you don't want to actually be a lumberjack. And that's not your fault. I just think that's what's happened. That's what's happened over 50 years.
But women have to touch gross things all the time. Like, they're expected to clean up babies' shit. Like, that's really gross.
I'm okay with that.
Why is that associated with motherhood and femininity?
I don't think it is anymore, Ben. I think that fathers are expected to do that just as much as mothers are expected to do it.
That must be a good thing. I mean,
of course it's a good thing.
What really struck me when you were talking is that there's this balance between that sense of nostalgia and yearning for those clearly designated gender roles, what men were expected to do, what women were expected to do, and the reality of now. And when you look back at that period, of course, there is also a sense of hostility towards it. That's what the second wave feminism movement was about. So is that where the confusion lies? I mean, should we be yearning for any of that back then?
Well, I think we can yearn for it, but it's not going to happen. We've moved on from it, and the feminist movement came about exactly because we weren't going to play those stereotypes anymore. That was the end of it. But I think what happens for us is that the way we've changed has crept up on us. It's been a gradual thing. It's evolved over 50 years, and we've still got our parents and grandparents around, most of us, you would have that sort of thing. So there's still an old blueprint running. And so we think, well, maybe we should be like that. Are we doing something wrong? Well, no, you shouldn't be like that, because we fought very hard for that to go away. So I think really that's what's happened, is that we're putting an old blueprint on who we are now. And it's not working.
So is it fair to say that what you're talking about are the unforeseen side effects of an overall, what you see to be a positive change?
Yes. And I just think that we're in the process of working through it. That's just the way it is. And it's going to take a little more time. I don't think we're at the end of it yet. I mean, it's only 50 years. It's not much.
Some of those unforeseen side effects, as you briefly touched on in your presentation, are that this perceived sense of emasculation and the fault of that lying at the feet of women. And there is a palpable anger from certain parts of the community, particularly men's rights activism, that responds really negatively to that, and that, as you said, seems to want to return to a time where they were free to be able to kind of lord over the roost with all the power, and that was legislated in their favour. And that having that removed from them now is perceived as actual oppression. And it reminds me of a quote that is from a book by Peggy Oranger called Schoolgirls, which is that for some men they perceive equality as a loss. So how do you think, kind of bridge that gap and target that sort of element of masculinity that can demonstrate that equality is actually liberating for all people, and liberating men as well from the expectation that they, Ben, you mentioned before the terrible rates of suicide amongst men, and I think that we can all agree that mental health is a huge issue for men, particularly one that isn't necessarily targeted or discussed because of the ideas that we have around how men should be stalwart and stoic. And certainly I can think of men from my father's generation that respond really proactively to that, but obviously it has a really negative impact on their lives as well.
And it's not just mental health, it's health in general. It's just, not dealing with things that need to be dealt with. I mean, it's, they're the kind of things that, while the gender pay gap is obviously tilted horrifically in men's favour, that the health kind of gap is similarly tilted in women's favour by the same kind of prejudices, I guess, and the same pressures to act in a certain way.
And I just wanted to point out, you must remember we had 4,000 years of a patriarchy. So there is going to be an element of male society that is just not wanting to give that up. There's just so much loss for them. And if they haven't developed that other side of themselves like our beautiful panellists have, it really is a great gift to have been able to dive into your feminine and make peace with it and be it and incorporate it into your life. If you just can't do that, if it's like a slur to have any femininity tainting your masculinity, then you're going to resent women because they're the embodiment of the problem.
But I'm still interested in this binary that you're mentioning between the masculine and the feminine. To me, it's confusing as to what those attributes are, and I think that a lot of that is really socially created. We think of masculinity as being someone who wants to remove the dead things, someone who wants to take care of the spiders, someone who is able to go out and bring home the bacon for the family. I don't think that those things are necessarily gendered attributes. No, I think that we've just created them that way.
Well, in the work that I do, the masculine and feminine traits are not that simple. They're actually internal, and that doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. So if you're a woman and you can pick up dead things, that's fine, but that just means that you're more action-oriented than somebody who's not, or you may be not as sensitive of nature as somebody who is, like Ben, you have a very sensitive nature. It's very, very obvious. So why should you pick up dead things? I'm with you. I don't like dead things, and I don't like animals being hurt. I was upset about that rabbit. So
he's a man. He's got to kill things.
No,
I didn't kill the rabbit. It was handed to me.
I really think we need to get away from those stereotypes that men have to kill things, and it's horrible. We're not those people anymore. Majority of us aren't those people anymore.
I mean, I do, just from being on social media and a beer brand that targets itself in Western Sydney, I wonder how, just how many men are sort of still hanging on to that, though. I mean,
they might not be hanging on to it. It might be put upon them. They might be living in a society or their relatives or whatever that just expects them to be the man. But what does that mean? And that's where I feel, my pseudo-masculine man comes into play. He's not real because he's actually not honouring the masculine within. And the masculine within doesn't need to kill things.
I wonder if there's a counterpoint to all of that, because I think that there's also another phenomenon where a lot of grizzly macho guys are that 1950s version of masculinity, and what they resent is being told they can't be. So rather than them yielding to this natural phenomena of becoming more feminine, I wonder whether there's also this oppositional phenomenon where, what we would consider to be a relic of the patriarchy still exists, and people hold on to that, and they're told actively not to. And whether that creates a whole lot of...
But don't you think, as we evolve, there's always going to be the people who lag. They lag behind the trend. I think that's really what's going on.
I think that you're right that there are people who are feverishly holding on to that kind of stereotype because it gives them comfort or power in some way. But I'm wondering whether or not there's... how does it make... you and Ben, as the man on the panel, how does it make you feel to have certain stereotypes and celebratory kind of ideals of masculinity, particularly in Australia? I liked how you touched on the Cheers Mate campaign, because for me, I feel like Australia's obsession with mateship and the mythology of mateship is incredibly masculine and has had, the terrible effect of really freezing women out of Australia's historical understanding of the creation of women's role, all back through the years. I'm wondering how you feel about the casting of assumptions about what it means to be in a man in Australia on the way that you both live your lives.
Okay, so I was raised in Queensland, which is almost like a concentrated version of Australia. So when you're being raised there, and I've spent 3 decades of my life in Queensland, there is this sort of there is this sort of ochre thing. Like when I get drunk, my accent becomes far more prominent and that sort of stuff. But the good thing, I think, for me in realising I was gay at quite a young age is that you have to start deciding what sort of man you want to be, because I think so much of expectations of masculinity are wrapped up within the idea of what a heterosexual man should be. Whereas, with being a gay guy, there are more sort of, especially, as I said before, when I was 17 and coming out, it was a pretty different era. It was still the late 90s. You didn't have this prolific variety of gay representation on media. I hadn't even met a gay person. So all I saw was Julian Clary. And that's not me, not in the daytime anyway. And I really had to negotiate, well, what sort of gay man do I want to be? And also, by extension, you brought up gay relationships before, and I thought it was interesting you talking about how one's always more butch. I would probably contest that, but contest it not in the way that you'd expect, in that I think people would look at me and my boyfriend and they're like, well, the white guy in that relationship is taller and he can grow a beard, whereas I can drive the manual car and I can catch spiders and shit, and one of us...
I think you have a deeper voice than Scott
and I've got a much deeper voice, and as I said before, I was the one who got through high school and passed, whereas he was the one who was relentlessly bullied, but he looks more
It's not
gorge.
about physical looks. It's what I was talking about is not about your physical looks. We'd have to know you to know who was the more butch one, and that might be you.
Yeah, but I sort of think that's a really heteronormative way of looking at same-sex relationships, because we're both guys. And I mean, what I think is when you do look at most same-sex couples, you would think, okay, X looks more masculine than Y. And you do have those, especially lesbian relationships, where someone will always be the butch and someone will say, I'm the D, especially in Southeast Asian lesbian. But look, this is some sort of weird anthropology I'm going into now. But there is that sort of dynamic there. But I think the great thing about being in a same-sex relationship, besides the fact that you never run out of underwear, is the fact that all of these roles are negotiated constantly. There's no, I will do the man thing, I will do the woman thing.
But I have to.
And that's an internal negotiation as well.
Yeah, well, I really think that evolved hetero relationships are like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I like to think that I have that relationship, in that everything is negotiated and it's all, we don't have roles as such. And I think that's an evolvement, and I think that would be really good if more hetero people were like that.
Is that a different way of framing it? I mean, the way we're talking about it sounds like we're so anxious about what kind of woman we need to be, what kind of man we need to be, but it really just seems like an open discourse.
I don't feel that about myself. Yeah. I'm just who I am. And as I was saying about our sensitive man, I always use him as the best of all of us because he flows between his masculine and feminine so easily. I mean, I know women who do that very well. I hope that I do that very well. I think I have a very strong masculine, but I can go to my feminine just as easily, but I probably predominate out of my masculine, but I flow, and that's what it is. And I think you need to be conscious of that is possible before you can actually live it.
Please join me in thanking my guests, Benjamin Law, Jennifer Granger, and Ben Birchall.